In this unit, you'll learn more about working with motifs. In previous looping courses, you learned to work looping into round, oval, square, and rectangle shapes. Those same elements and other shapes can be used individually or in combination in freeform looping. We'll add some variety using color in this unit. For this demonstration, I chose to build a sheath for a black jar to make it easier for you to see the process in the video. But first, I don't want you to get the idea that freeform is always built on a substrate. At the end of this video, I'll talk more about some projects worked using motifs that don't have the benefit of a stabilizing element underneath. But before you decide to tackle something like that, I strongly encourage you to spend some time working with motifs made of different fibers using a substrate. For the demonstration in this unit, let's begin with an analysis of a motif. This one began with a needle chain as the live edge for an oval. At the end of the oval, I worked a short needle chain. At the tip of that chain, I changed to a different thread color and trapped the tails as I stitched back along the chain. After a few more stitches, I worked another needle chain, stitched back along one side, then worked another short needle chain before reconnecting with the main body of the motif. To begin a project like this, make a number of small motifs using different starts, different intervals, and different sizes for the elements. Then start auditioning arrangements against your substrate. It's harder than it sounds to avoid creating a regular pattern when what you want is a freeform feel. Sometimes it's simpler to allow yourself a few small pattern elements. In this piece, I decided to begin most of the motifs with the gold thread and to use the green thread only for stitching together motifs. Take time to look at the piece as you work. As you stitch elements together, things may align differently than when you audition them, and that may call for a shift here, a tweak there. Go with the flow, trusting your eyes and your instincts. Keep adding motifs as necessary. Sometimes you'll end up with a negative space that seems too large, and you can add a small motif to help fill it. Bridges can become line elements that help add some movement to the composition. Here, those lines create a pattern around a shape at the side of the piece to help draw interest to what might be on the other side. At some point, you may see something that you wish you'd done differently. Before you start taking things apart, though, see if you can't find a way to work with what you have to make it more pleasing. For example, I felt like the green cinching on one side needed a little more visual weight. And on the other side, my eye was drawn to a straight horizontal line where motifs joined, and it seemed to cut the piece into awkward proportions. So I went back and whipped that cinching to beef it up. And then looked at it from different angles and distances to see if that change satisfied me. On the other side, the separate puddles of green distracted me even more than that horizontal line I told you about. So I used some chain stitch on the surface and laid some bridges to help tie those green areas together. As for that awkward horizontal line, again I worked on the surface to add some visual weight below that line to help balance it and draw the eye down and around. Working with a substrate in a motif-based project helps limit and define space while you figure out how to fill it. But the substrate doesn't necessarily have to be a permanent part of the piece as it is in this vase. For these fingerless mitts, for example, the substrate was actually my left arm. I made a few motifs, stitched them together, tried it on, added more stuff, and kept building on to what I had until they were fingerless mitts. For this bag, I joined motifs to make the flap. But these soft wool yarns didn't hold their shape very well, so I stabilized the flap by stitching another layer on the back of it. For this vest, I used a heavy cotton yarn for more stability. Once I had a pile of motifs made, I started piecing them together using a dressmaking form as the substrate. That form is a couple sizes smaller than I am around the middle, so once the shoulders were done, I switched to a flat pattern I cut from craft felt. You could also use a paper pattern. When the body of the vest was complete, I stabilized the edges using cross-knit looping. This vest integrates a lot of motif and joining techniques, including flat panel motifs, round starts, open rounds, ovals, needle chains, whipped bridges, simple looping, cross-knit looping, and even some stitch variations you may not have seen before. Once again, I strongly encourage you to spend some time working with motifs made of different fibers in smaller projects before you tackle a big project like a garment. But since I'm showing you things to plant ideas in the future, here's one more. There's no reason why motifs must be two-dimensional. In this unit, we addressed a lot of design concepts as we went along. We're working toward the goal of integrating design on a barely conscious level in Freeform. In preparation for that, we'll focus on design in the next unit, which includes 2 small demonstration projects. I hope you'll be tempted to tackle smaller projects like those before you get sidetracked by big possibilities.